And the reading that you should have read is Successful College Composition that you can see right there on my screen share. And you are going to be reading from 1.1 to 1.3. Okay, at first I just want to go over what we're going to be talking about today. And I hope to get some of your input in a discussion area that I've created, as well as bulletin boards, and you can always contact me through Canvas. We can have a threaded discussion that way. So I do hope to be able to do that with you. Okay, chapter 1, as you can see on the screen, is Introduction to Writing. Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And if you know The Sound of Music, you know that that song is from that great script that was also written by a great writer and musician. But 1.1 here is becoming a successful writer. This all depends on you and how you define success. I have 2 advanced degrees from Cal State Fullerton in English and in teaching English as a second language, and in language, writing, and rhetoric. Obviously, I loved going to college and I stayed in a long time. But most of my career I spent teaching 4th graders and other K-5 grades, mostly 4th. But there's a different definition of being a successful 4th grade teacher than there is of being a successful writer. You've all heard of Stephen King. Stephen King is a very mammoth, behemothly, if that's a word, famous writer. He's written so many horror movies. Pretty much the chances of you watching a horror movie and Stephen King wrote it are very high because he's made a lot of films out there. And so by most people's standards, he's considered a successful writer. But what if you finally get a job that you actually like and you're writing something that maybe people wouldn't consider to be successful, like a travel narrative? Perhaps you've been hired to travel around and write about Ireland and England and Africa and all the places that you always dreamed of going. And you wrote about them and they went into a book or they went into an archive. You got paid for it. If your definition is to get paid and travel for writing, then by definition, you are a successful writer. You don't have to be Stephen King to be a successful writer. The author talks about writing to think and communicate. This is really important in life, especially this life that we're all living right now, where there's all kinds of messages out there. CNN, Fox News, you name it. There's all these messages. Which ones do you believe? Well, believe it or not, writing in a journal, writing on a blog, writing even on these little microblogger things like Twitter, it actually takes skill. And you have to think through what you're saying if you're going to convince anybody. Let's face it. Some people will just like it if they like you, but we're talking about something beyond that. We're talking about writing to people you do not know and trying to persuade them. Overcoming writer's block, this is a really important thing, and I certainly will cover it probably in a future class, but for now I'm going to skip it because you're here, and being in this class is a huge step toward overcoming writer's block. And I'm going to pour all my passion into these lessons so that while you're watching them and reading them and listening to them, you feel that excitement for writing. And I think I can do it. Can you follow along? That's the question. Do you want to be a successful writer? In college writing, you need to select an appropriate voice. And I really want to encourage you to maybe go back through this section. It says it's on page 7. And really look at the different ways that you can choose a voice for what you're writing. It's very important. It might even be one of the most important things. I feel like in my writing, and let me just tell you what I write for. I write on my personal blog, and I also write for a horror movie website. And I review horror movies because I just love them. and I write about 650 to 1,000 words about a movie they want me to watch, and then it gets put up. And so I find that to be very satisfying. So I found an appropriate voice to make those reviews. And sometimes I'm just SMH. Have you ever heard that? Shaking my head about some of the movies that come out. And I know the appropriate voice that I've gotten used to and that I feel readers respond to. So the question to myself is, am I successful? Is my stuff being published? Yes. So therefore, I feel I am a successful writer. The proper pronoun focus is important, but I'm not going to include that on the quiz. I would encourage you to read it, though, because it's very interesting, and we will be talking more about it as we're delineating the different parts of the outline that we're going to do, and then eventually write 4 papers. That's what you'll be doing this semester with me, is writing 4 papers, and I hope you love it. I think you will. Transitioning into 1.2. Purpose, audience, tone, and content. What's your purpose? We just talked about this a little bit. If my purpose is to inform fellow horror movie fans of movies that suck or movies that are really creepy and they might want to check out, if that's my purpose, then I'm all set because I know how to do that. If someone is writing a story, say about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and it has to be published that exact day, I always think about this, how hard that must be. Then you have a different set of criteria that would make your writing effective. It needs to be to the point. What else can you think of? I mean, they give a few examples in the book, but if you're going to be a political writer that's going to put articles up as fast as you can, I don't know that that's a good thing, by the way. I think we're too quick as a society to throw stuff up there. The olden days, they had to sleep on it, and put it to bed, they used to say. And then the article would go up a day later, and people were okay with that. But now with the internet, we just has to be so fast. I don't know where we're going with that. What do you think? Okay, so you've got your purpose down. You've got your audience down, who you're writing to, and the audience is a very interesting idea. We're going to get into that a little more as I finish this lecture. But outlining your audience is a good idea. You say, outlining my audience? I thought I was only supposed to do Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, all the way to 5. No, I'm talking about 1, just sticking on 1. Who is my audience? What's their vocabulary level? What's their reading ability? Sometimes you do have to consider that. I mean, maybe they're 4th graders. Maybe you're writing how to go into the computer lab in a little pamphlet, and the 4th graders, it has to be understandable to them. Although I will say that some 4th graders know computers better than me. Along these lines, there is the idea of identifying common academic purposes. If you can identify what is common with your reader, they call it the other. I think Piaget was the psychologist that talked about the other with a capital O. When you get old enough to where you've self-actualized in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm getting psychology right now, although I'm not a psychology teacher, so don't use me as a study tool. But I will say that when you have that psychology of your reader in your mind, it makes it a lot more easy to be effective because you can hit those things that they care about. That's what politicians do. It's what good writers do too. I remember reading Firestarter by Stephen King years and years ago when I was in high school. And in it, they were doing studies on people, giving them these weird psychotropic drugs that would make them start fires with their mind and stuff like that. So the audience for that was probably people from the 70s that actually did those kinds of experiments, and they feared that the government would do those kinds of experiments. Well, it turns out if you've read Firestarter, they have a little girl, Drew Barrymore, in the movie. The book obviously doesn't have Drew Barrymore. The book's better, by the way, it usually is. But in the movie, this little girl's just able to start fires with her mind because her parents were pretty much mistreated by the government and involved in a campaign to test a drug that had not been tested and was very dangerous. So he knows who he's talking to. He's talking to the hippies that protested everything. He's very smart. So when you do your discussion on this lecture and on the reading, I'd like you to think about academic purposes and why we write for things. Is a paper you're going to write about defending a woman's right to choose to have an abortion, is that paper going to be different from a paper that's saying whether a movie was good or not? Probably. You can't seek universal agreement on either one of them, but you can appeal to a different audience depending on what paper you are writing. So frame your audience. That's probably one of the most important things of this first reading in this class. Frame your audience. Who are you talking to? You might say, hey, Damien, I'm talking to you. You're my teacher. I can't think of anything else besides you. Okay, guess what? I've been doing this long enough. I can imagine. I want you to think of somebody, not necessarily me, but somebody that has the hopes and values that you can latch onto and persuade. And that's who you need to be writing to. But I will look at it and I will say, do they know who they're writing to? And if there's some things that just completely are disjointed and wouldn't fit with that audience, then I will let you know. But that's the process of outlining and pre-writing and pre-thinking something. So we'll take about a week to make our pre-writing and make our outline before we even start writing the paper. The last part I want to talk about for this lecture is using sources. And using sources is what sets a writer apart from being somebody who's just, writing away on, an opinionated column and, letting their fingers do the walking kind of a thing, as opposed to someone who has thought out what their argument is. They have pruned it like a little bonsai tree. Have you ever seen those little bonsai trees? They prune it and prune and prune and prune every day, and they keep it small, and eventually they just become these beautiful little trees that have been pruned so much. That's the way you should think of your writing in college and in an academic setting. I actually wrote my thesis at Cal State Fullerton to get my master's in English. I wrote it on the concept of audience from the ancient China idea of rhetoric all the way. Han Fai Tzu was the person I focused on, all the way up to the modern day of the 70s and the beatniks, and how audience has changed as a focus, and how we can use audience and writing to actually generate ideas and pass along ideas and be convincing with those ideas. The audience is everything. If you don't think about your audience, you're never going to be successful. Next time, I will be getting into some more exciting things, especially writing thesis statements, the guidelines, the outline, the guiding light, if you will, of all your papers is the thesis statement, and we'll be getting into that next. But as far as this, please go and write what you've got from the, there's a set of criteria on what to write on in the assignment section. So go to the module and then bring up the assignment that's based on the reading from 1.1 to 1.3 and comment there on some of the things that I have said, as well as, and more importantly, the stuff that's in the text. So I would love to read your thoughts on that, and I will. Once you have put your thought down, please comment on 2 other people's comment before you go. And I will see you for the next lecture.